I'm going to read from this book, Laya Yoga, Definitive Guide to the Chakras and Kundalini, and this section is called Laya Yoga, Its Significance and Method. So it's going to talk a little bit about Laya Yoga. Laya Yoga is that form of yoga in which yoga, that is samadhi, is attained through Laya. Laya means absorption, by the way. Laya is deep concentration causing the absorption of the cosmic principles that is embodied in the chakras, stage by stage, into the spiritual aspect of the supreme power consciousness. It is a process of absorption of the cosmic principles in deep concentration, thus freeing consciousness from all that is not spiritual, and in which is held the divine luminous coiled power termed Kundalini. Vishnu says, Laya Yoga is that in which chitta, sense consciousness, undergoes laya, that is, it becomes absorbed in deep concentration. There are many methods for achieving this, but the most effective is dhyan, means deep concentration, on God in form, which can be done also while walking, standing, eating, resting. This is Laya Yoga. So he's talking about the meditation and absorption upon God in form, and this is exactly what Gaudiya Vaishnavism teaches, is that to meditate and absorb upon God in form. Sense consciousness, which is the field where sensory images are constantly being formed, becomes transformed through the process of concentration into a form where the penetration of sensory images stops, and consequently consciousness is free from image undulations, and therefore in a state of concentration. This state of consciousness is termed superconsciousness. So sense consciousness is transformed into superconsciousness by deep concentration, by taking the divine form as an object of concentration. The divine form is made living in Ishtadevata, who appears from the living mantra. Under this condition, concentration becomes real and deep. Maheshwar says, when one is established in Laya Yoga, there is a union between the embodied spirit and the supreme spirit. And because of this, consciousness becomes completely absorbed, and along with it, the cessation of respiration takes place. Here, the final stage of Laya Yoga has been explained. In the stage of Laya, all sensory images from the consciousness are eliminated, and therefore the sense consciousness becomes highly refined and is transformed into superconsciousness. This is the stage of samprajñata samadhi, superconscious concentration. Thereafter, the real union of the embodied spirit and the supreme spirit takes place when superconsciousness is absorbed. It is the stage of asamprajñata samadhi, non-men's concentration. This is the final stage of Laya Yoga. At this stage, the normal cessation of respiration occurs. This is kevala kambaka, normal cessation of respiration. It clearly indicates that when consciousness undergoes complete absorption in Laya Yoga, kumbhaka, breath suspension, arises automatically. In Hatha Yoga, deep concentration is attained through the process of kevala kambhaka, and in Laya Yoga, through deep concentration, kevala kambhaka is normally attained. Laya process. In the Vaidika Laya process, the cognitive faculties, namely speech, prehension, locomotion, exertion, excretion, and reproduction, are to be controlled by will-mind in concentration stage by stage. These actions become unmanifested owing to their tranquilization by control. The stages of control are as follows: 1. Reproduction, 2. Excretion, 3. Locomotion, 4. Prehension, 5. Speech. These control processes are carried out in the lower 5 subtle centers. In this way, the body becomes motionless and the mind becomes free of all thoughts about the body. Smell, taste, sight, touch, and sound are the senses. They are controlled in concentration in the 5 subtle centers, stage by stage, while the sense mind residing in the 6th subtle center is also controlled. Consequently, the sense mind does not radiate the object substance to sense consciousness. This results in sense consciousness becoming free from objective images. This is the state of pratyahara, sensory control. When this is established, consciousness undergoes dharana and dhyan, and finally samprajñata samadhi. Then samadhi consciousness is completely absorbed into the power aspect of supreme consciousness in time, Shakti. This is the stage of asamprajñata samadhi. By the process of control, the cosmic principles, namely the cognitive faculties, senses, sense mind, sense consciousness, and superconsciousness, become unmanifest and absorbed into spiritual power consciousness in deep concentration. The absorption of the cosmic principles in deep concentration, which is associated with control, is Laya. So Laya is the control process which causes absorption in concentration. The Laya has 2 stages. First, the absorption of sense consciousness, and secondly, the complete absorption of superconsciousness into supreme power consciousness, that is, into Param Shiva Shakti. It has been stated, mind has 2 forms, impure and pure. The impure mind is full of desires, and the pure mind is free from desires. Mind is the cause of both our bondage and our liberation. The mind which is attached to sense objects causes bondage, which is attached to sense, and when it becomes free from objects, it leads to liberation. Therefore, he who desires liberation should make his consciousness free from all objective images. So that means that when your subconscious is purified from all of the lower psychic forms which it created in its dualistic consciousness, it's free. When it becomes free from the kind of gunky, sticky attachment of these forms, then liberation can be had. But until then, those forms are the astral nightmares which are causing one to become continually reincarnated. By the Laya process of all objective images are eliminated from consciousness, which becomes pure. The purified consciousness becomes transformed into superconsciousness in a state of samadhi, arising from Laya. Laya develops into samadhi. It is stated, the non-rising of the absorbed multiforms of the consciousness is the limit of the control. Adhyatma-upanishad. This requires explanation. The term Laya derived from li, meaning be absorbed in. Laya in the technical sense of yoga means absorption in deep concentration. When the multiforms of consciousness undergo absorption in concentration and do not rise again to interrupt it, consciousness develops into samadhi. This process of absorption consists of various stages. The first of these is concerned with the absorption of sensory images and all cognitive impulses. The next stage is the absorption and concentration of intellection and thoughts. In this way, when the perceptive, volitive, and intellective functions of the mind are fully controlled by absorptive concentration, sense consciousness begins to be transformed into superconsciousness. When concentration becomes deepest, samadhi is attained. Samadhi is the superconscious field. In the superconscious field is termed samprajñata samadhi, that is superconscious concentration. The control power has now reached its highest degree of development. It is then termed nirodha or sang nirodha, that is super control. This is the limit of mental control. Quote unquote, speech should be controlled in manas, that is mind. Manas and gyan atman, that is knowledge of self. Gyan atman in Mahan, and Mahan in Supreme Atma. Mahan is superconscious mind, and superconscious mind be absorbed in Supreme Atma, that is Krishna or Narayan. Kathopanishad 1-3-13. Here speech stands for all organs of voluntary action and the senses. The organs of action are controlled in manas, that is will mind. The senses are controlled in manas, that is sense mind. Gyan Atman is sense consciousness and intellect, and Mahan is eyeless supermind, super consciousness. The senses are controlled in the sense mind, that is, in concentration the power of control is developed, which causes absorption of the senses in sense mind. In a similar manner, the senses are controlled in the sense mind, that is, in concentration the power of control is developed, which causes absorption of the senses in sense mind. In a similar manner, the sense will, the will mind, the sense consciousness, and the intellect are absorbed in concentration. So, by the power of control manifested in concentration, the senses and the sensory aspects of the mind are absorbed. After this, the supermind is manifested. Now, concentration is developed into samadhi. Finally, the supermind is absorbed in supreme concentration and is absorbed in supreme concentration into supreme spirit. This is the state of non-mental supreme concentration. Manas is higher than the senses, intellect is higher than manas, and Mahan is higher than intellect. The unmanifested, that is, Prakriti, is higher than Manan, and the infinite and supreme Purusha, that is, supreme consciousness, is higher than Prakriti. One who knows him in samadhi becomes free from bondage and is immortal. Kathopanishad 2-3-7. The different aspects of the sensory mind, the supermind, and what remains beyond mind have been stated by Jama. He also indicates the stages of absorptive concentration. Here manas is the sense mind. The senses, sense mind, and intellect are the main aspects of the sensory mind. When these are absorbed in concentration, Mahan, that is supermind, is reached. For attainment of non-men's concentration, the supermind should be reduced to Prakriti, primus, by the absorptive concentration. Prakriti is that fundamental principle in which the supermind undergoes negativity. Then Prakriti itself is absorbed in the Purusha, disembodied consciousness principle. The various principles which are absorbed in concentration by stages have been called here the earth, water, fire, air, void, subtle earth, water, fire, air, void principles, the principles of smell and its objects, etc. All of those are to be absorbed. The eye, the sense mind, locomotion, it's basically saying that everything is to be absorbed into the supreme Narayan. You don't have to wait until after you die to be absorbed in the supreme Narayan. That's a lot of these things, a lot of these, Vaishnavas just don't get. It happens while you're alive. All of the great saints, like mystics, Chaitanya, and all the great Gaudiya Vaishnava saints, they were all absorbed into Krishna and Narayan while they were alive. They were in Vrindavan already while alive. So, what is this? So they're in Vrindavan already while alive. Why is everybody waiting until some pie in the sky fantasy, some dream in the future that's supposed to happen to you? Nonsense. By the gradual absorption of yourself. This is what's comprising yourself. Earth, water, fire, air, everything is comprising you, is absorbed in its subtle form. The subtle form is the tanmatra in the chakra. So these are absorbed into the kundalini in the center of the shushumna, and then into the top, into the crown center, which explodes outwards, and then you are immortal, truly. The 5 forms of metamatter, mahabhutas, and 5 tanmatras, 5 senses and their objects, 5 organs of volitional actions and will, mind, intellection, eye, feeling, sense consciousness, supermind, and the energy aspect of supreme power consciousness, which is the source of all creative phenomenon, are to be absorbed in deep concentration in order to reach Brahman. When all principles are absorbed in concentration, what remains is Brahman, the Supreme Spirit. It has been stated that Brahman is infinite, being by itself beyond mind, subtler than the subtlest, far away and still near. That Brahman is hidden in what has been manifested as life mind matter. I'm going to read from this book, Laya Yoga, Definitive Guide to the Chakras and Kundalini, and this section is called Laya Yoga, Its Significance and Method. So it's going to talk a little bit about Laya Yoga. Laya Yoga is that form of yoga in which yoga, that is samadhi, is attained through laya. Laya means absorption, by the way. Free from image undulations, and therefore in a state of concentration. This state of consciousness is termed superconsciousness. So sense consciousness is transformed into superconsciousness by deep concentration, by taking the divine form as an object of concentration. The divine form is made living in Ishtadevata, who appears from the living mantra, Kundalini. Vishnu says, Laya Yoga is that in which chitta, sense consciousness, undergoes laya, that is, it becomes absorbed in deep concentration. There are many methods for achieving this, but the most effective is dhyan, means deep concentration, on God in form, which can be done also while walking, standing, eating, resting. This is Laya Yoga. So he's talking about Laya is deep concentration causing the absorption of the cosmic principles that is embodied in the chakras, stage by stage, into the spiritual aspect of the supreme power consciousness. It is a process of absorption of the cosmic principles in deep concentration, thus freeing consciousness from all that is not spiritual, and in which is held the divine luminous coiled power termed the meditation and absorption upon God in form. And this is exactly what Gaudiya Vaishnavism teaches, is that to meditate and absorb upon God in form. Sense consciousness, which is the field where sensory images are constantly being formed, becomes transformed through the process of concentration into a form where the penetration of sensory images stops, and consequently consciousness is